It is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce the incomparable Vicki Tambellini. She is the CEO and founder of the Tambellini Group, a preeminent IT advisory firm that serves exclusively the higher education industry. No one has sat across more tables from institutional leaders as they have grappled with really difficult decisions about their next IT investment than Vicki Tambellini. So we are in for a real treat today to learn from her about how we can all make kind of better, smarter, more strategic decisions about technology so that we can drive more resources and impact to teaching, learning, and research. We can see how critical the student experience is kind of to academic outcomes. Why are institutions, making the real college try, the real Heraclean effort, but yet we're not seeing kind of the dial kind of move in the ways that we'd expect in terms of kind of better enrollment, better retention, better academic kind of outcomes.
Nicole, thank you for that warm introduction and for inviting me to talk with you today. And I think that the challenges that institutions face are certainly different based on the size and type of institution. And it's always tempting to talk about higher education as if every institution of size and type has the same problems, when really we have to look at institutions differently depending on whether we're talking about a Research One institution versus a two-year community college in a rural environment versus an urban environment. So certainly every institution is not the same for every problem, but I know that our research shows that the one problem is the same consistently throughout recent years, and that is that the main problems that institutions struggle with aren't technology problems at all. What institutions really have to think about first is the technology decisions in context with the people and the processes that they have in place, because otherwise they make decisions that don't really serve the institution and they're not capable of organizationally taking on the change that they think that they want to undertake. And one of the reasons is that there's a complete disconnect between what's available today and what institutions are prepared to take on. I mean, if you think about the way systems were developed decades ago, which is the way most institutions are still operating, they were developed for administrators to be able to perform their jobs better. And so that's the way people who work in higher ed are looking at systems typically, is how can my job be easier? How can I do my job better? When students are looking at the interaction that they have with an institution from the perspective of how is my experience better? How can I graduate faster? How can I get my tuition paid for? How do I know that my financial aid is right? How do I know I'm not going to run out of financial aid? How do I make sure that I'm maximizing my aid so that it's used in the best way possible? So in order to do that, we have to have a student-centered approach. And it's a very difficult change for leadership to undertake.
With this new technology, that change becomes kind of not an episodic kind of event where I'm implementing my technology. We're going to be able to bound kind of what change happens at my institution to kind of one where change and innovation moves to kind of a more continuous experience where, it happens well before the implementation, during the implementation, and well after the technology has been implemented as well. And what kind of advice would you give to institutions about how to kind of create the capacity for change that they may not have had in the past?
when the discussion first begins on campus about making a significant change, the first thing people think about in the business units is that maybe they aren't going to have a job. Maybe their roles are going to be replaced by technology and that they won't be needed anymore. And that doesn't have to be the case. Efficiencies should be expected, and there should be an opportunity to automate tasks that were previously done manually. But the requirement for people to be involved or have opportunities for more personal interaction with students and to provide better service certainly exists. So for the projects to be successful long term, first of all, projects don't end. They don't start and end the way they did years ago because there's continuous improvement. The institution now, we could before we could defer system upgrades and system improvements, and sometimes we see that there are institutions who made a decision 20 years ago, and in many cases haven't made improvements in many years. So we can no longer do that once we go to a cloud-based solution, because we're going to get improvements at least multiple times a year, 4 times a year in an Oracle environment. So we want to make sure that the business units are equipped with subject matter experts who can help us make the best decisions about what functionality is going to be best suited for the institution. And so understanding where our key resources are, who is most appropriate to be trained and have that continuous opportunity is critical. So again, that has nothing to do with the technology. It's all about people.
Absolutely. I mean, Vicki, it seems so kind of critical for the institution to be planning and building almost a formal structure for sounds kind of wonky, but like a post-cloud world for the institution. This is why you see kind of offices of transformation and innovation kind of pop up at places like, you see that at Vanderbilt University, you see that at the University of Wyoming. I mean, is that advice or recommendation that you would give to institutions?
And Vanderbilt is a terrific example of a success that I think other institutions should follow. Where we see success is where those kinds of offices, it doesn't have to be called the same thing, but the critical point here is that these are institutional imperatives. And we established then from an institutional perspective that the program, the process, the direction is critical for the overall institution to be successful, and that whatever decisions are made are not associated with a single person or a couple of people at the institution, so that when things get hard, and they will, if the person that made the decision leaves, that the project doesn't stop. The institutions that have been successful have adopted these programs and set up these kinds of offices and said, this is important to the institution. It wasn't just a CIO that said, or a CFO or a provost or whoever that said, this is what I want to do. It's something that the institution is fully behind and has leadership support and funding. And that's another thing that we see can often derail a project, is if the funding isn't fully allocated. The institution goes forward with funding for the initial implementation and the initial fees for 5 years or 10 years, but they don't fund this transformation office. They don't fund the ongoing training. They don't fund the ongoing funds for the professional development that goes on for subject matter experts within the departments. All the things, the change management activities, things that support the individuals and teams that will make the long-term success of the institution possible.
Many folks in the audience today are either having just completed a deployment, are up to their eyeballs in a deployment, or are thinking kind of about a migration kind of to the cloud. What are some of the, I don't know if we use like a trip analogy, not that all of us are going on lots of trips these days, but kind of what are some of the things that institutions should be kind of packing in their bag, things that they should be thinking about kind of as they plan that migration journey?
Before an institution makes a technology decision, we would always advise them to think carefully about their existing culture and the outcomes that they're trying to accomplish before they think about what they need to pack for that cloud journey, so to speak. And looking carefully at how ready they are to make such a change, and also to think about their ability to absorb change and the timeline that they really want to absorb the amount of change that they're thinking about, their cultural readiness, the institutional readiness, the funding that they're going to need, and then think realistically about not just the technology that's going to be involved, but the amount of change management that they're going to have to undertake, and the business processes that they're going to need to think about changing, as well as the other things that are going to be impacted, things like integrations, for example, data migrations, data cleanup, and perhaps even using best practices rather than system customizations, and the ability for an institution to adopt best practices versus making customizations. And it can sound very easy to do, while in practice, in particular, the larger the organization and the more sophisticated the software that they've been using in particular, I think that the institutions that have been operating in an Oracle environment previously are going to really have to think about how they migrate to new systems, because they're going to have to make trade-offs between best practices and completely customizing every screen. And these are things that are important to achieve efficiencies and also to deliver better experiences. And so it's something that can be rolled out quite efficiently in an Oracle environment as the institution can absorb change, which is a terrific benefit, I think, in the Oracle environment, and something that we know Oracle customers have asked for specifically. So I think it's critical for the institution to take a hard look at themselves and understand really what they are capable of accomplishing with any system.
What type of guidance would you give institutions about how to really structure and approach and think about that selection process, or almost the life cycle of the selection process? So ultimately they do arrive, be it 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months down the road, with real tangible kind of return on that investment.
The ideal situation is to start with why. Why are we doing this? Why do we want to make a change? What is the purpose? What is the vision for what we want to become as an institution? We significantly discourage buying a system the same way you bought a system 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And for most institutions, it's more like 25 years ago. So we really discourage that kind of process. Unfortunately, we see some institutions insist on a feature function comparison, which we think is significantly outdated. We do think that it's important to understand the art of the possible. Where would you like to be? How would you like to interface with your constituents? What would you love to be able to do? How could you accomplish more with less? Wondering how institutions can improve their efficiencies and deliver on the promise of a better experience with technology is certainly critical. And also think about how you're going to get through. I think in particular in the Oracle environment, that the way that you do the migrations is also pretty important. It's really a strong benefit, I think, in the PeopleSoft environment to be able, the migration path is certainly easier within the Oracle family.
So Vicki, I started my career in the admissions office, and I always asked every candidate who came into every intrepid candidate that came into my office, is there anything else you would like to say on behalf of your you are certainly not applying to Oracle University today, but is there any other kind of parting words of wisdom to our audience, kind of as they kind of go on this journey of transformation with technology in higher education?
Fully understand the impact that the change is going to have for your people and for the institution. Be top of mind. If you don't have the full funding for your project, don't do it. If you can't get support for change management and support for cleaning up the data prior to starting on an implementation, you're not going to be successful. You need to have plans for identity and access management. You need to have plans for integration services. You need to have plans for and funding for contingency. You've got to have the ability to have ongoing training and subject matter experts in the departments, all kinds of things that are not just your initial project budget and need to have that funding in place over a long period of time. And if you can't get that support initially, I wouldn't even think about starting a project because you won't be successful. And I think that, and we have a team of analysts here that work on this, do this work every day, and we've seen it too many times play out where institutions have not had this support, and those are high profile failures. So I think that we can confidently make that recommendation. And the other thing I would say is that don't be afraid to start the journey. Just know that the minute you think you're ready to start, you've already started. You've already begun the transformation.
So with that, Vicki, I want to thank you as always. Wonderful, wonderful conversation. Kind of no question about why so many institutions have turned to you and your intrepid analysts to kind of guide and support kind of their journeys to the cloud and with different technology investments. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to the audience for sticking with us during this really fantastic and insightful conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.